Germany, 1923. Hyperinflation has obliterated the national currency. A single loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Families fed banknotes into their stoves because burning money is cheaper than buying firewood. Then comes 1929. The Great Depression strikes. Banks fail. Factories shut their doors. By 1933, 6 million Germans are unemployed, nearly 30% of the entire workforce. Families are starving in the streets. This is the Germany Adolf Hitler inherits when he takes power in January 1933, a nation economically shattered not once but twice. And yet, only 6 years later, by 1939, everything appears transformed. Germany invades Poland with 3 million soldiers, 3,000 tanks, 4,000 aircraft, the most modern and formidable military force in Europe. In just 6 years, a bankrupt and broken nation has constructed the most powerful war machine on Earth. How was this possible? The answer lies in a phantom corporation, a financial mastermind, and a nationwide Ponzi scheme. At the center of it all were the MEFO Bills, a shadow banking system that secretly financed Nazi rearmament while concealing it from the rest of the world. By 1939, those bills were coming due, and Germany did not have the money to repay them. As a result, Germany had little choice but to expand outward, invading its neighbors to avoid economic collapse. The Nazi economy was not built solely on ideology or nationalism. It was built on a financial deception that required continuous expansion simply to survive. This is how Hitler paid for World War II and why economic collapse made war unavoidable. Before continuing, imagine yourself in January 1939. You are Germany's leading economist. You know the economy is on the brink of disaster. You understand that Hitler's only solution is war. Do you speak out and risk your life, or do you remain silent and allow events to unfold? Real people faced this exact dilemma. By the end of this story, it will become clear why every possible choice led to disaster. To understand how desperate Germany really was, we need to revisit the two catastrophes that paved the way. The first was the hyperinflation of 1923. In November of that year, at its absolute peak, a single US dollar was worth 4 trillion German marks. Workers demanded to be paid twice a day, once at lunch and again at the end of their shift, because by evening their morning wages had become worthless. Restaurants changed prices while customers were still eating. Waiters climbed onto tables every 30 minutes to announce new menu prices. Life insurance policies that families had paid into for decades matured into payouts that could not purchase a single postage stamp. This was not merely an economic crisis, it was economic annihilation. The German middle class saw its savings, pensions, and investments wiped out almost overnight. Eventually, Germany stabilized. A new currency was introduced, daily life began to recover. Then, in 1929, disaster struck again, the Great Depression. American banks recalled their loans, German businesses collapsed, unemployment skyrocketed. By 1932, 6 million Germans, 30% of the workforce, were without jobs. Families auctioned their furniture on the streets just to buy food. Engineers and teachers begged for work as manual laborers. The Weimar government was paralyzed. Political violence became routine. Communist and Nazi street battles turned German cities into open combat zones. In the span of 14 years, Germany was economically destroyed twice. This was the environment that propelled Hitler to power. In January 1933, Hitler promised to restore German greatness, rebuild the military, and defy the Treaty of Versailles. But Germany was bankrupt. Versailles limited the country to an army of 100,000 men, prohibited tanks, aircraft,
submarines, and heavy artillery, and even if those restrictions hadn't existed, Germany lacked the money to build them. Hitler needed to rearm on a massive scale, in secret, without alerting the world until it was too late. And he needed to do it with an economy that had already collapsed twice. This is where Hjalmar Schacht enters the story. Born in 1877, Schacht was a banker, economist, and financial prodigy. He had already saved Germany once before. In 1923, as currency commissioner, he ended hyperinflation by introducing a new currency backed by land assets. It worked. The Rentenmark stabilized the economy, and Schacht became a national legend. On March 17, 1933, Hitler appointed him president of the Reichsbank. In August 1934, Schacht became Minister of Economics. His task was clear: finance massive rearmament without public awareness, without triggering inflation, and without revealing Germany's true intentions. Schacht was brilliant, and he had a plan. Germany needed tanks, aircraft, ships, and weapons. That meant paying steel producers, arms manufacturers, and chemical companies. But if the Reichsbank simply printed money, two things would happen. First, inflation would return, and Germans would never tolerate a repeat of 1923. Second, the payments would appear on official Reichsbank records, alerting foreign governments that Germany was rearming. Intervention would come before Germany was ready. Hitler needed money that was invisible, money that would not cause inflation, money that would not appear on official balance sheets. Schacht created exactly that. In 1934, he established a company called Metallurgical Forschungsgesellschaft, the Metallurgical Research Company, known as MEFO. On paper, it was a research consortium. 4 major German firms, Siemens, Krupp, Rheinmetall, and Guttenhoffenhut, held shares in the company. Its stated capital amounted to just 1 million Reichsmarks. In reality, MEFO did nothing at all. It was a shell company, a legal fiction with stationery and a bank account. But MEFO was about to finance the largest rearmament program in history. Here's how the scheme worked. Imagine you are a German arms manufacturer in 1935. The government orders 1,000 tanks from your factory, but instead of paying you in Reichsmarks, it pays you in MEFO bills.
These bills were essentially IOUs, promissory notes issued by MEFO, the fictitious company. In simple terms, they were checks stating that MEFO promised to pay a specified amount 5 years in the future. But waiting 5 years wasn't an option. Manufacturers needed money immediately to pay workers and purchase raw materials like steel. So they took these MEFO bills to private German banks. The banks examined the bills and understood exactly what they represented. They knew MEFO was ultimately backed by the Reichsbank. They knew the Reichsbank would honor the obligations. As a result, the banks exchanged the MEFO bills for cash, real Reichsmarks, usually at a small discount. The arms manufacturers were satisfied. They had their money. Here's where the system truly worked its magic. The private banks now held the MEFO bills. They in turn took those bills to the Reichsbank. Using its authority to issue currency, the Reichsbank converted them into cash. But this is the crucial detail. None of these transactions appeared on the Reichsbank's official balance sheets. MEFO bills were classified as private obligations. They were not government debt. They were not central bank liabilities. On paper, they were simply debts owed by a private research company. As a result, when foreign governments examined Germany's financial statements, they saw nothing alarming. The massive rearmament program remained invisible. Between 1934 and 1938, Germany issued roughly 12 billion Reichsmarks in MEFO bills. To put that into perspective, Germany's total national debt in 1932 was about 10 billion Reichsmarks. In other words, Germany secretly added obligations exceeding its entire pre-existing debt, and no one outside the country fully understood the scale until it was too late.
By 1936, Germany had violated every major military restriction imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Tanks, aircraft, submarines, and a modern army were all in place. The Allies failed to intervene because they did not realize how far rearmament had progressed. But there was a fatal flaw in the system. MEFO bills matured after 5 years. The earliest ones, issued in 1934, came due in 1939, and Germany did not have 12 billion Reichsmarks to repay them. Time was running out. This is where the comparison to a Ponzi scheme becomes unavoidable. A Ponzi scheme promises future payouts and uses new money to pay earlier obligations. It functions only as long as new funds continue to flow in. Once that flow stops, the entire structure collapses. Nazi Germany's economy operated on the same principle. MEFO bills were promises to pay later. The plan was to use future economic growth to cover them. But by 1938, the German economy simply could not generate enough revenue. The system required new money. And when your economy cannot produce 12 billion Reichsmarks, the only option is to take it from others. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss. Austria possessed gold reserves, foreign currency, and valuable industrial assets. Germany seized all of it. In September 1938, under the Munich Agreement, Germany took the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. Then, in March 1939, Germany occupied the rest of the country. Czechoslovakia held substantial gold reserves and the Škoda Works, one of the most advanced arms manufacturers in Europe. Germany seized everything. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Poland offered agricultural output, natural resources, and millions of people who could be forced to labor. Germany took all of that as well. The Nazi economy was not merely immoral, it was structurally dependent on conquest. As one historian put it, they had to invade countries in order to survive. Hjalmar Schacht saw this outcome approaching. By 1937, he warned Hitler that the economy was overheating, that military spending was unsustainable, and that collapse was inevitable. Hitler ignored him. On January 7, 1939, just weeks before the first MEFO bills were due, Schacht submitted an urgent report from the Reichsbank's board of directors. It called for drastic cuts to rearmament spending, reductions in overall expenditures, and a balanced budget as the only way to prevent inflation. Hitler's response came on January 20, 1939. He dismissed Schacht as president of the Reichsbank. Schacht had built the system, but he had also embedded a time bomb within it. Hitler's solution was not to defuse the bomb, but to keep feeding it. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, eventually France, the Soviet Union, and beyond. The war was not driven solely by ideology, it was driven by economic necessity. By 1939, Germany faced only two options: economic collapse or territorial expansion. Hitler chose expansion. But MEFO bills were not the regime's only source of funding. The Nazi economy relied on additional mechanisms, ones even darker in nature. When Germany conquered a country, it did not merely impose political control. It systematically looted everything of value: gold reserves, foreign currency, artwork, industrial machinery, raw materials. In France, Germany imposed occupation costs. The French government was forced to pay 400 million francs per day to finance its own occupation. In the Soviet Union, Germany planned to extract grain, oil, and minerals to fuel the war effort. The entire economic system was parasitic. And then there was slave labor. Prisoners from concentration camps were forced to work in German factories, producing weapons, manufacturing components, and mining coal. Corporations such as IG Farben, Siemens, and Krupp relied on camp labor. Prisoners were worked until they died, and then replaced. The Nazi economy was not only sustained by theft, it was built on slavery. This was not just immoral behavior, it was the economic framework of genocide. One final example illustrates the depth of the deception. The Volkswagen, the people's car. Germans were promised that by contributing monthly payments through the German labor front, they would eventually receive their own car. Over time, 275 million Reichsmarks were collected from ordinary citizens. How many civilian Volkswagens were delivered during the entire Third Reich? None. The factory was converted to military production, manufacturing the Kubelwagen instead of the promised people's car. German savers lost everything. Compensation did not come until the 1960s. The Nazi economy did not only steal from conquered nations, it betrayed its own people.
It even stole from its own citizens. Here's another example. During the 1920s and early 1930s, Germany borrowed enormous sums from Britain, France, and the United States. These loans were officially intended to help Germany meet its Versailles reparation obligations. Germany accepted the money. Then, in 1933, Hitler simply stopped paying reparations, but kept the loan funds. In effect, Germany used money borrowed from Britain and France to finance the military that would later invade both countries. When Germany invaded France in 1940, the newly installed Vichy government forgave part of that debt. Once again, Germany benefited financially at the expense of its future enemies. Add to this the confiscation of Jewish property. Jewish businesses, bank accounts, homes, artwork, everything was seized by the state, sold off, or directly absorbed into the regime's finances. This was not merely persecution, it was systematic theft used to fund the government. Every element of the Nazi economic system was built on taking from others. By 1939, the regime was running on MEFO bills, plunder, forced labor, and outright theft. None of it was sustainable. By that point, the economy was teetering on the edge of collapse. The MEFO bills were coming due, and Germany had no way to repay them without looting additional countries. The economy was overheated. Inflation pressures were returning. Shortages were becoming visible. Schacht had warned this would happen, and his predictions were proven correct. But instead of slowing down, Germany accelerated. Pulling back would have meant economic collapse, mass unemployment, political instability, and ultimately the end of the Nazi regime. For Hitler, there was only one direction left: forward. This is the aspect of Nazi Germany that many people fail to grasp. The war was not driven by ideology alone. It was driven by economic necessity. The Nazi economy was deliberately constructed to require constant expansion. Without conquest, it could not function. Historian Adam Tooze explored this in detail in his book The Wages of Destruction, which examines how the Nazi economy was built and why it inevitably broke apart. From the very beginning, Nazi Germany was living on borrowed time. Its economic model depended on perpetual warfare to survive. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, it was not solely about Lebensraum or racial ideology. It was about oil from the Caucasus, grain from Ukraine, and raw materials needed to prevent economic implosion. War was not separate from the economy. The war was the economy. And when Germany began losing territory in 1943 and 1944, that economic model unraveled. There was no more plunder, no new resources, only relentless expenditure. The Nazi economy was a pyramid scheme, and like all pyramid schemes, it eventually collapsed. So let's bring all of this together. How did Hitler pay for World War II? The truth is, he didn't. The Nazi economy rested on four foundations. First, creative accounting. MEFO bills allowed Germany to hide 12 billion Reichsmarks in off-the-books debt, secretly financing rearmament, while the rest of the world believed Germany was still recovering. Schacht's brilliance lay in creating invisible money, but invisible money is still debt, and debt must eventually be paid. Second, plunder.
Germany funded its war effort by stealing from every territory it conquered: Austria's gold, Czechoslovakia's weapons factories, France's occupation payments, Soviet grain, Polish labor. The Nazi economy was parasitic. It required a constant supply of new victims to survive. Third, slavery. Concentration camp prisoners, prisoners of war, and forced laborers from occupied countries were worked to death in German factories. They produced the weapons used to conquer more land, which in turn produced more slaves. The economic system was inseparable from genocide. Fourth, theft. Jewish property, defaulted Versailles loans, canceled reparations, even money stolen from German citizens through schemes like the Volkswagen Savings Program. Every aspect of Nazi economics involved taking without compensation. So, was Nazi Germany essentially a Ponzi scheme? In practical terms, yes. Early obligations were paid using resources taken from later conquests. When MEFO Bills came due in 1939, Germany lacked the funds, so it invaded Poland. The loot from Poland financed operations in France. The loot from France financed the invasion of the Soviet Union. As long as Germany kept winning, kept expanding, and kept stealing, the system held together. The moment expansion stopped, the entire structure collapsed. That is why war was inevitable. By 1939, Hitler faced only two choices: expand or collapse. The Nazi economy was not designed for peace. It was designed for war. And that is how Hitler paid for World War II, with promises he could not honor, with money he did not possess, with resources he stole, and with labor he enslaved. The Nazi war machine was not powered by economic strength. It was sustained by a scam that required endless conquest to avoid collapse. When the conquest ended, the economy died along with the regime. So here's the question. Knowing that the Nazi economy depended on constant expansion to survive, do you believe the war was unavoidable? Or could Germany have stepped back and transitioned to a sustainable system? Share your thoughts. And if this changed how you understand the Nazi economy, consider liking the video and subscribing for more history that connects economics, politics, and war.